Hi, I'm Dr. Sherwana Davis, and I'm a psychotherapist. I wanted to share with you my review and 3 lessons learned from this week's episode of Married to Medicine. In this week's episode, we were able to gain 3 lessons, and they all came at the wedding. In this week's episode, Dr. G and Sweet Tea made it official and got married. That provided us with a wealth of lessons about boundaries. Lesson number 1, communicate your boundaries. We saw in this episode Dr. Heavenly and her husband show up, only to learn that they were not included on the guest list. So apparently, Sweet Tea had set a boundary. Unfortunately, Dr. Heavenly and her husband didn't find out about this boundary until they actually showed up. So lesson number 1, when you're setting a boundary, make sure you communicate it. You have a higher probability of those boundaries being enforced when people know that you've set a boundary. And you can set a boundary verbally, face-to-face, via text, video. There's a lot of different options. Now, in fairness to Sweet Tea, she had a lot going on in this episode. She was planning that wedding, so it may not have been on her priority list to actually communicate the boundary that was set. But in our real lives, it's really important that when we set boundaries, if at all possible, we communicate them. That goes to lesson number 2. In this episode, Dr. Heavenly and her husband still made an appearance at that wedding, even though Sweet Tea had attempted to set a boundary. So, lesson number 2, acknowledge when your boundary has been crossed. And we saw Sweet Tea do this in a very professional way. She saw Dr. Heavenly and her husband show up at that wedding, even though they were not on her guest list. That leads us to number 3, which is assess and in some cases adjust. In that same moment, after Sweet Tea acknowledged that her boundary had been crossed, she had to make a quick decision and assess what her options were. In that moment, she had the option of making an attempt to ask them to leave again or go on with her wedding. And she made the decision that it was more important to go forward with this special day that she had planned and go forth with her wedding without making a disturbance. I am so looking forward to the rest of the season. I have a feeling we're going to revisit this boundary lesson over and over again because it seems to be popping up on the various episodes. Let me know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to know your impressions and any lessons you learned from this episode. I look forward to reviewing next week's episode and sharing the lessons that we learn all over again. Thanks so much for watching.